May 6, 1945. A converted schoolroom in the town of Linz, Austria, 2 days before Germany's unconditional surrender ends the war in Europe. The blackboards still have arithmetic problems written on them in chalk. A child's drawing of a house and a dog is pinned to the wall above the window. Outside, American trucks move in both directions on the main road, and the air smells of diesel and wet spring grass. Inside the schoolroom, a folding table has been set up against the far wall with 3 stacks of documents on it, each stack roughly 2 feet high. A single wooden chair sits in front of the table. The chair is empty, but not for much longer. In approximately 4 minutes, an SS officer named Werner Holtz is going to walk through that door and explain to the American sergeant waiting for him that he cannot possibly be held responsible for what happened at the place those documents describe. He is about to discover that the American sergeant agrees with him completely. Staff Sergeant Thomas Egan was 28 years old. Sart. He came from the Larimer neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the son of a steelworker who had put in 31 years at the Cary furnace on the Monongahela River. Before the war, Thomas had worked 4 years on the floor of the same mill and spent his evenings studying at night school, working toward a degree in accounting that he never quite finished. He was a methodical man with large, careful hands and a habit of writing in small, even block letters that his supervisors said looked like typeset. He enlisted in March 1943 and spent the first year of his service in England doing something that seemed to him entirely undramatic at the time. He kept records, he catalogued, he cross-referenced. He built filing systems for a unit that processed incoming intelligence documents, and he did it with the same patient precision he had brought to mill floor inventory logs. His commanding officer eventually noticed this and arranged a transfer. By the spring of 1945, Egan was assigned to the 3rd Army's War Crimes Documentation Detail, a small unit whose job was to enter liberated camps, collect every written record the Germans had left behind, and begin the process of turning those records into legal evidence. He had walked into 4 camps in the past 3 weeks. He had not slept more than 4 hours on any of those nights. He had not spoken to anyone about what he had seen except in the formal language of the reports he was required to file. His hands were perfectly steady when he wrote. He had learned to keep them that way. SS-Hauptsturmführer Werner Holtz was 36 years old, a native of Hamburg and a trained civil administrator who had joined the SS in 1938, not from fanaticism, exactly, but from the same calculation that sent into the party structure during those years. Because it was where the advancement was, because it was where the security was, because it was easier to move with the current than against it. He had a university degree in public administration. He had a wife and 2 daughters in Hamburg. He had spent 3 years as a senior records administrator at a camp in occupied Poland, managing the intake documentation, the labour assignment ledgers, and the mortality registers that the SS maintained with a thoroughness that would, in a few years, make them among the most damning evidence produced at Nuremberg. He had never personally beaten a prisoner. He had never personally operated the machinery of death. He had sat at a desk, managed files, signed forms, and followed the administrative directives of his superiors. He had told himself this distinction mattered. He had told himself this distinction would protect him. He had been telling himself this for 3 years with increasing urgency. And by the time the American MPs brought him into the schoolroom in Linz, he had the argument so thoroughly rehearsed that he delivered it before Egan had even asked him a single question. "I am a prisoner of war," Holtz said, settling into the wooden chair with the composed bearing of a man who has decided his best defence is visible calm. "I hold the rank of Hauptsturmführer in the Waffen-SS, and I am entitled to the protections afforded to captured officers under the Geneva Convention. I wish to make my position clear from the outset. I was an administrative officer. I kept records. I processed documents according to the directives issued by my superiors. I did not participate in any actions against prisoners. I followed orders, as every soldier in every army is required to do. I am not a war criminal. I am a prisoner of war and I insist on being treated as one. Egan sat across the table with a pencil and a notepad and let Holtz finish. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." Holtz blinked. "I know you kept records," Egan said. "That is actually why you are in this room." He placed his hand on the first stack of documents on the table beside him. "These are the intake ledgers from the camp your unit administered." He placed his hand on the second stack. "These are the labour assignment logs." He placed his hand on the third stack, the tallest one. "These are the mortality registers. 4,112 names. I have verified the count 3 times. Holtz looked at the stacks with the expression of a man who has just noticed something he cannot quite identify as a threat. Egan uncapped a pen and placed it on the table in front of the wooden chair. "Your orders," Egan said, "are to copy every name from these registers onto the blank ledger sheets in front of you. Full name, date of birth where recorded, date of death where recorded. You will write legibly, you will not skip entries, you will work until I tell you to stop." Holtz stared at the pen. He looked back up at Egan. "I beg your pardon," the SS officer said. "You kept records for 3 years, Egan said. "You followed orders. You were an administrator." "Those are your words, not mine. I am giving you an administrative task, and I am ordering you to complete it. The pen is in front of you." Holtz's composure cracked slightly at the edges. "This is irregular," the SS officer said. "This is not how prisoner processing operates. I demand to speak with a senior officer. Captain Yates will be available tomorrow morning," Egan said. "Until then, your orders are the ones I just gave you." He pointed at the first ledger. "The names begin on page 1. Holtz looked at the stacks of documents. He looked at the child's drawing above the window. He looked at the arithmetic on the blackboard. He picked up the pen. He worked for 11 hours that first day. Egan sat across the room at his own table, doing his own documentation work, filing his own reports in the same small careful block letters, and did not speak to Holtz again except to bring him water twice and a plate of rations at midday. Holtz did not eat much. By the end of the first day he had copied 407 names. Some of the entries included ages. Some of the people in the mortality registers were children. Holtz's handwriting, which had been precise and administrative when he started, had changed by late afternoon. The letters became slightly larger. The pressure of the pen on the paper became heavier. He did not say anything about this. Neither did Egan. On the second day, Holtz arrived at the schoolroom before Egan did. He was sitting in the wooden chair with the ledger open when the sergeant came through the door. He did not explain why he had come early. He picked up the pen and continued where he had left off. By the end of the second day, he had copied 900 names. At one point in the early afternoon, he stopped and sat motionless for several minutes, with the pen in his hand and his eyes fixed on the page. Egan did not look up from his own work. He did not say anything. He simply waited. After a few minutes, Holtz began writing again. On the morning of the third day, Captain James Yates arrived at the schoolroom to conduct Holtz's formal interrogation. Yates was a lawyer from Cleveland who had practiced civil litigation before the war, and who approached prisoner interrogation with the same methodical patience he had brought to depositions. He found Holtz seated at the table with the ledger open, still writing. Yates looked at Egan with a question in his expression. Egan told him what he had ordered the prisoner to do. Yates was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Carry on," and took a seat against the wall and watched. Holtz finished the entry he was on, set the pen down on the table and looked at his hands. He had copied 1,340 names by that point, just under a third of the total. Captain Yates began the formal interrogation. Holtz answered every question. He answered them without the practiced composure he had displayed on the first day. He answered them in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who has spent 48 hours writing the names of the dead in his own handwriting and who has run out of the particular kind of distance that makes certain arguments feel true. Egan never recorded the 3 days of transcription work in Holtz's official prisoner file. He completed his own documentation reports, filed his evidence logs, and processed the intake ledgers and mortality registers as formal evidence in the standard manner. In a private letter to his younger sister in Pittsburgh, he mentioned the incident once, briefly, writing that he had found a use for a German paper pusher that seemed appropriate to the circumstances. He described it in one sentence and then moved on to other topics. His sister kept the letter. It was found in a box of family papers. 60 years later, Thomas Egan returned to Pittsburgh in October 1945. He finished his accounting degree on the GI Bill, passed his CPA examination on the first attempt, and spent 34 years as an accountant for a manufacturing firm in Allegheny County. He was known among his colleagues for his exceptional precision with records and his complete intolerance for documentation errors of any kind. He retired in 1979, the same year his wife of 30 years was diagnosed with the illness that would take her 4 years later. He was a quiet man who attended his church, kept a neat yard, and never mentioned the war at social gatherings. He died in 1997 at the age of 80. His son, clearing out the house, found a single photograph in the bottom drawer of his father's desk, a picture of a schoolroom with 3 stacks of documents on a folding table and a wooden chair. No people in the frame. His son did not know what he was looking at. He kept it anyway. Werner Holtz was held for processing through the Allied War Crimes Evaluation System and eventually classified as a major offender under the denazification framework, a designation that carried mandatory internment and a full trial. He was tried in 1947 in proceedings connected to the broader camp administration cases and sentenced to 12 years in a military prison. He served 9. He was released in 1956 and returned to Hamburg, where he worked for the remainder of his life as a clerk in a shipping company. He never gave interviews. He never joined any of the veterans organizations that provided networks of support and mutual reinforcement for former SS men trying to rebuild their post-war identities. A German journalist who tracked him down in the early 1970s for a documentary project on camp administrators, but sat with him for a few minutes in a Hamburg cafe and said only that he had spent a long time understanding that keeping records was not a neutral act. He died in 1981. The journalist noted that his hands shook slightly when he held his coffee cup. Some legal historians who have studied the post-war documentation proceedings argue that Egan's unofficial 3-day transcription order was legally meaningless, that it had no standing in any formal process, produced no evidence that would not otherwise have been collected, and served only as a form of psychological punishment administered by a non-commissioned officer outside any sanctioned procedure. And they are correct that it changed nothing in the official record. Others have argued that it changed something. The official record was not designed to measure, that forcing a man who had hidden behind the language of administrative neutrality to inhabit that neutrality completely, name by name, for 11 hours a day, accomplished something that a formal interrogation could not. What is certain is that Holtz arrived in that schoolroom with a practiced argument about the difference between following orders and bearing responsibility, and that he left it 3 days later, having lost whatever internal conviction made that argument feel like protection. If you had been in Egan's position, would you have given the same order, or would you have sent Holtz straight to the formal interrogation and moved on? Tell us in the comments, and if you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, subscribe, because the moments the official records filed quietly away are often the ones that tell the most truth.